Welcome, everybody. We'll wait about a minute so that everyone can make it in, and then we'll get started. All right, I think we should get started now. So aloha kako, everyone. My name is Kapena Baptista. I am a project consultant in the Office of the Commissioner at the Administration for Native Americans. We're so excited to welcome you today for the second of our Native American Heritage Month speaker series. Today with Diane Wilson presenting a talk called Seeds and Stories. We're also joined by ANA Commissioner Patrice Kunesh. The program today will run roughly 60 minutes with about a 40-minute presentation from Diane, followed by a brief 10-minute Q&A. Just a couple housekeeping notes. The chat is open. So if you ever want to kind of comment while the presentation is happening and engaging in that way, feel free to. But keep in mind, if you do have any questions that you'd like to submit for the Q&A, please use the Q&A feature on the bottom bar. Do not put questions in the chat because we might miss them. So with all that said, I'll hand it over to the Commissioner Kunesh. Just a brief introduction. Commissioner Patrice Kunesh is of Standing Rock Lakota descent and is the Commissioner for the Administration for Native Americans. In her role, she serves as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Native Affairs and as Chair as the HHS Interdepartmental Council on Native American Affairs. That's a mouthful. She has worked at the Native American Rights Fund and has held appointments as the Deputy Undersecretary for Rural Development at the U.S. Department of Agriculture and is the Deputy Solicitor for Indian Affairs at the U.S. Department of the Interior. So welcome, Commissioner.
Good day, my relatives, and I am so glad to see everyone joining us today in this space and coming together with a good heart. I am absolutely thrilled to bring to you today a speaker who's very, I feel, near and dear to me. And I'm just so thrilled that the work that we're doing in ANA to support social economic development really embodies this theme of seeds. And we're going to be hearing a lot about that with Diane's comments with us today. But I think the theme of seeds beautifully encapsulates the essence of our journey as Native peoples. Seeds are so much more than tiny little vessels. They are our cultural heirlooms, carefully cultivated and protected and handed down through generations. They really are the living legacies of our ancestors, holding within them our stories and knowledge and traditions. So, Diane, we are so pleased to have you join the HHS Administration for Children and Families, the Administration for Native Americans, as we celebrate our heritage as Native Americans. Your work is just really phenomenal and has really impacted me. For the audience, Diane is a writer and educator of Mdewakanton Dakota descent. She is enrolled with the Rosebud Sioux tribe. She has published 4 award-winning books and numerous essays, including her 2021 novel, The Seed Keeper, which received the Minnesota Book Award for fiction. It's truly a remarkable story of heritage and hope. I fell in love with Diane's writing in 2006 when I read Spirit Car, A Journey to Dakota Past. And I felt like I was traveling with her as she discovered her Dakota heritage. And here's a quote from the book that I think really encapsulates this journey that maybe many of us are on. One day, I realized that my entire back seat was filled with relatives who wondered why I wasn't paying more attention to their part of the family story. Sooner or later, they all came to the front seat and whispered stories in my ear. So Diane is a former executive director of Dream of Wild Health, an indigenous farm, and the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance. It's a coalition of tribes and organizations working to create food sovereignty systems for Native people. And of course, it all connects to seeds. Diane, welcome.
Pidamaya, Hamatakiapi, Ampetu Kinde Iushkian Wachian Kapia, Diane Wilson Namakiapia, Bedewakantuano Yate Hamatahaya, Sichangu Oyate Ed Omawapia. So hello, all my relatives. It's good to kind of see you here today. And my name is Diane Wilson. I'm a descendant of the Bedewakantuano Oyate, the Dakota people in Minnesota, and I am enrolled on the Rosebud Reservation. And I want to thank Commissioner Patrice Kunesh for that lovely introduction, and the administration for Native Americans for the invitation to be here today. And I want to wish you all a very happy and peaceful Native American Heritage Month. And just so you know, I'm speaking to you today from the homelands of the Dakota people in Minnesota Makoche, which is also known as Minnesota. And I am going to ask you to bear with me for 2 seconds while I get my my screen set up here. And can you see this? We'll assume.
Yes.
Okay, yes. Yay, the tech is working. It's the first hurdle. And so today, what I would like to share with you is a story really about seeds and some of the work that I've done over the past 20 plus years, both in writing, working with seeds, and also working with 2 organizations that are focused on food sovereignty. And so I'm going to share this story with you, and then I would be very interested in having a conversation afterwards and answering any of the questions that you may have. I will be talking somewhat a little later about the book itself, The Seed Keeper, but so much of my work has been about other aspects of seeds and stories. So I will cover a fair amount of ground today. And I want to start by saying that in our time, that when I talk about seeds and stories, that I really like to begin by remembering the strength and courage of our ancestors who protected these seeds and our stories, and whose prayers made our lives possible. And I would also like to celebrate the beauty, brilliance, and joy that is part of reclaiming our relationship with the earth and our more than human relatives. So in my life and work, I have always said that I'm a gardener and a writer, and that means I take care of seeds and stories. To me, our seeds carry the stories of the land we live on, while our stories carry seeds for the future we hope to create. As a Dakota writer, I'm descended from people who were and continue to be oral storytellers. One of the best new books that explains the importance of this oral storytelling tradition is We Are the Stars, Colonizing and Decolonizing the Oceti Sakowin Literary Tradition, And that book is written by a young Lakota scholar, Sarah Hernandez. And as Sarah explains, our stories range from ancient and sacred narratives to more modern stories that convey important teachings to help ensure the survival of the Oceti-Sakowin. Sarah focuses on the work of Charles Eastman, Ella Cara Deloria, and Elizabeth Cook Lynn to show how women have always served as their tribe's traditional culture keepers, while missionaries sought to displace them through boarding schools and mistranslating oral stories. Today, Native writers are reclaiming these stories as a way to preserve our cultures and help heal our communities. So I think of my own work as written stories that also preserve Dakota history and culture while reflecting on our contemporary experience with assimilation, especially with regard to the teachings embedded in our traditional stories. My first book was a memoir, Spirit Car, Journey to a Dakota Past, that focused on the impact that assimilation has on cultural identity. My second book was nonfiction, Beloved Child, A Dakota Way of Life, that explored historical trauma through interviews with Native elders and the ways in which we can transform trauma into a better way of life for our children. And my recent book, the novel The Seed Keeper, asks the question, how can we restore our Indigenous relationship with the earth? I've also written a middle grade biography of Ella Cara Deloria, a Lakota writer who left us an incredible legacy of language and stories, as well as a picture book, Where We Come From, that encourages children to think about their own family stories. At the heart of my writing and my work in food sovereignty is a commitment to cultural recovery that was inspired by Dakota historian David Larson, who said, "When you know what was taken away, then you can reclaim it." My own story began in Minnesota, where I've lived most of my life, a place that is the traditional homeland for the Dakota and Anishinaabe peoples. The Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota tribes form the Oceti-Sakowin, or Seven Council Fires. So I began working on The Seed Keeper back in the year 2000, while I was also writing a memoir about my mother's family. I grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, while my Lakota mother grew up in South Dakota and spent 6 years at the Holy Rosary Mission School on the Pine Ridge Reservation. But no one in our family knew about the history of boarding schools or the devastating impact they've had on generations of Native families. I learned this history as an adult while writing the memoir Spirit Car that traced back 5 generations in my mother's family to show how boarding schools and other assimilation programs have worked across generations. And while I was working on the memoir, I heard about a collection of old, rare tribal seeds that were being grown out, excuse me, being grown out by Dream of Wild Health, a tiny native-led garden in Minnesota. And as a gardener, I knew immediately that I needed to work with these seeds. And as a writer, I was fascinated by the powerful stories they carried, such as the Cherokee Trail of Tears corn, Hopi black turtle beans, and traditional tobacco that was hundreds of years old. These seeds carried stories of the seasons, of the ancestors who grew them, and the ancient wisdom of the mother plant herself. What I didn't know then was the long history these seeds carried, how close they had come to extinction, nor the important role played by Native women who had ensured their survival despite immense challenges. Our ancestral memories and stories tell us that human beings once held an original agreement with seeds where we agreed to take care of each other. Seeds began collaborating with humans at least 9,000 years ago in the country now known as Mexico, when a wild grass allowed herself to become domesticated into maize or corn. These early gardeners named this plant teosyntes, which translates to mean creator plus maize, reaffirming the sacred nature of the relationship between human beings and plants. Given the widespread practice of Native people traveling long distances to trade with other tribes, maize eventually found her way across the country. Many of the tribes who began growing maize have stories that tell how corn first came to them, as well as ceremonies, songs, and prayers to honor her gift of food. For people who knew too well what it meant to be hungry when game was scarce, maize offered the gift of survival. These early gardeners also developed squash and beans, creating the basis for the Three Sisters Garden that would eventually spread widely throughout North America. Over many generations, indigenous people of the Americas would develop 3/5 of the world's foods, including maize, potatoes, tomatoes, squash, beans, chocolate, and sunflowers, just to name a few. They also accumulated a vast knowledge of plant properties that became the basis for modern pharmacology. Indigenous peoples held detailed traditional knowledge about how to live in balance with the natural laws of a particular place. Tewa educator Greg Coyetti calls this sacred science, knowing, remembering, practicing, and implementing place-based natural laws, which consist of practical knowledge for survival, such as knowing where to find water, the seasonal cycles of plants and medicines, and understanding the animals who provide our food. As tribal food systems were reliant on locally harvested plants and animals, each tribe developed their own specific food traditions, ceremonies, and gender roles. In the Midwest, Dakota men were often responsible for hunting and fishing and warfare, while women took care of providing shelter, food, clothing, and caring for children. Because of these distinct yet equal roles, the first people to cultivate maize in a new area were most likely women. As a result, they developed a much deeper understanding of cultivated plants and created the first agricultural tools they needed to make this work easier. One of the most useful tools was a hoe made from the shoulder blade of a deer or bison that was commonly used until traders introduced iron hoes. Before settlers arrived, much of the southern half of Minnesota was covered with millions of acres of incredibly rich, diverse tallgrass prairie. Described as a sea of grass, the prairie was formed over thousands of years through a fortuitous combination of glacial till, wind-dropped organic material, manure from grazing animals, aeration by prairie dogs, and an occasional fire. The result was a vast landscape with deep topsoil that supported over 200 species, including bison, a revered animal relative for the Oceti-Sakowin. This was the homeland for the Dakota, who were nomadic hunters, skilled gardeners, and wild food gatherers. Throughout the year, they moved around the region following the seasonal availability of their food. Corn was planted in June when the strawberries were ripe, often near wild artichokes that indicated the soil was fertile. Much of the corn was eaten fresh, while some was dried and stored in bark containers that were buried. As missionary Gideon Pond noted, the corn belongs to the women. In Dakota, we say Mitakuye Owasi, which means we are all related. One of the most important teachings for Dakota people was to be a good relative. Our kinship rules were tribal law. That meant being a good relative to each other and to all beings around us by demonstrating and honoring reciprocity in caring for each other. When European settlers arrived in Minnesota in the 1800s, they brought with them a very different relationship with the land. The clash between cultures that began in 1492 was as much about our drastically different food systems as it was about our differing values, languages, and spirituality. Where indigenous cultures were centered in kinship with all beings, including plants, animals, land, and water, settlers introduced a worldview that regarded land as a commodity that could be bought and sold. Through nearly 400 treaties, tribes across the country were dispossessed of land they had lived on for thousands of years. In exchange, tribes received payment and annuity goods that undermined the traditional foods that were central to indigenous culture. When the Dakota were forcibly removed from Minnesota after the 1862 US-Dakota War, they were in essence surrendering their traditional foods and medicines as well. In place of a traditional diet based on locally hunted and gathered foods, they were moved onto reservations and given commodity foods that were high in starch and fat, a story that was repeated with tribes throughout the nation. Within a generation, we began to see significant health changes within our communities that today have resulted in a near epidemic level of type 2 diabetes. This change had a profound cultural impact as well. When food comes in cans or in sacks, there's no reason to maintain the ceremonies and songs that were part of planting and harvesting our traditional foods. Passing on traditional food knowledge and practices became more and more difficult as fewer families continued to garden, forage, and hunt. Boarding schools broke families apart, and children were taught a different relationship with the earth. The seeds that had helped sustain Native families for many generations began to disappear. As for the tallgrass prairie that was once one of the largest ecosystems in the country, between 1830 and 1890, nearly 18 million acres in Minnesota were plowed under to make way for farms, with less than 1% remaining today. This diverse ecosystem was replaced with an agriculture system that would come to rely on growing limited crops, chemical fertilizers and pesticides, and genetically modified seeds. 150 years ago, the United States did not have a commercial seed industry. Today, companies like Monsanto and Bayer control what has become the world's largest commercial seed industry, promoting a form of genetic manifest destiny throughout the world. By 2015, 94% of the world's seed varieties had disappeared. No longer were seeds, plants, animals, and water regarded as relatives to be cared for as taught in our traditional stories. This new agricultural system brought a profound shift toward treating the earth and the foods she provides as commodities. If our ultimate goal is to make money at all costs, then we can rationalize an agricultural system that was built on the backs of slaves and migrant workers, that embedded racism within the heart of our food system. How our communities eat and how our food is grown is central to all of our cultures, as well as intimately connected to the environmental and civil rights issues we face. The food choices we make create the world we live in. So how do we reclaim a relationship with seeds and our food that is based in indigenous principles of kinship and reciprocity? We know that our ancestors protected these seeds at all cost because they, like our children, are the future. And yet our seeds are currently facing a climate crisis and a sixth mass extinction. But if we look beyond the news headlines, then I believe we will see instead that we are facing a crisis of relationship, where the community of care created through upholding Mitakuye Owashi has been dismantled and disregarded for the sake of profit. When we open our hearts to relationship with other beings, then we're also opening our hearts to grief for the loss of so many exquisitely beautiful, tender lives that have been sacrificed for our convenience. How do we respond to such grief? What actions can we take when the issues we face are global in their immensity? How can one person or one community make a difference? These are the questions I struggle with each day. But when I step outside my front door and see sandhill cranes preparing for migration, when I harvest wild grapes or offer prayers of gratitude as the rain replenishes our lakes and rivers, then I remember my responsibility for the relatives who are still here. Choctaw historian Devon Mahisiwa has written, "The recovery of the people is tied to the recovery of food, since food itself is medicine, not only for the body, but for the soul and for the spiritual connection to history, ancestors, and the land." Caring for our indigenous seeds is one of the ways that we reclaim our relationship with the earth. Despite the many challenges that our seeds have faced, there have always been families who held onto their seeds and continued to garden. Some of these seeds eventually made their way to Dream of Wild Health through a gift from a Potawatomi gardener, Cora Baker, who donated her lifetime collection of seeds to the farm. She sent the seeds with a letter saying she had prayed and prayed that Indian people would start gardening again. Cora knew that one of the most important ways we rebuild the health of our communities is by returning to gardening and our traditional foods. Her gift of seeds allowed a new generation to learn how to garden and care for them once again. This is the work of reclaiming food sovereignty, Indigenous communities relearning how to grow, cook, and feed their families with healthy, culturally appropriate foods. One of the most important steps towards food sovereignty is understanding the legacy left by our ancestors. The teachings embedded in our stories help with the difficult work of cultural recovery as we reclaim what has been displaced and understand the responsibility we carry today. In 2008, when I began working for Dream of Wild Health, I was blessed to work with Native elders, farmers, youth and their families, and the seeds themselves. We began each morning in a circle near the fields, all of us coming together for prayer before beginning the work of the day. Arapaho elder Ernie Whiteman opened each circle by saying, "Good Native American morning." Even the sleepy teenagers couldn't help but smile in return. We smudged to cleanse our spirits and offered tobacco with prayers in gratitude to the plants, soil, water, birds, and animals who shared this farm with us. Before we planted or harvested or shared a meal, we prayed in circle. And in this way, we learned that when we garden with reverence, then our food truly becomes our medicine. In our time together at Dream of Wild Health, we learned that seeds are our ancestors and our relatives. They taught us mindfulness, reverence, and taking a long view of our work, 7 generations into the future. When we took care of our seeds, they reconnected us with our own stories, with our ancestors, and they helped heal the broken places in our families, including the trauma left by boarding schools. From a place of deep gratitude, I grow them in my own garden, protect them through the winter, and give them voice through my writing. Today, the tiny garden where I first volunteered to work with seeds has grown into a successful, native-led 30-acre organic farm in Hugo, Minnesota. At the heart of their work is a belief that we are healing ourselves, our ancestors, and our future generations when we learn how to plant a garden, when we remember to offer prayers to our plants, and when we share delicious meals using indigenous foods. Just as important as caring for our seeds was passing this knowledge to the next generation. Dream of Wild Health hosts several youth programs that teach culturally based garden and cooking and leadership skills to young people ages 8 to 18. Every season, we saw how reconnecting with the earth helped youth transform into community leaders. I also worked with the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance, or NAFSA, a national network of Native individuals, organizations, and tribes who are working together to rebuild sovereign food systems. NAFSA provides education, advocacy, and networking that support Native communities in reclaiming traditional food knowledge and skills from planting seeds to cooking. NAFSA has been supporting the development of regional seed hubs for tribal communities and organizations like Dream of Wild Health. The success of both organizations is rooted in the efforts of generations of women and families who protected the health and well-being of our seeds, plants, animals, soil, and water. None of this work would have been possible without the ancestors who first developed this incredible legacy of foods, who created tools, who took such care to pass on this knowledge, and whose sacrifices protected the seeds when they needed it most. And when conventional farming had all but eliminated this old way of gardening, it was the courage and determination of a few who brought it back, who kept those seeds alive. Dream of Wild Health and the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance both provide models for creating food systems and reclaiming food sovereignty that are built on a foundation of justice and equity, which is essential to a spiritually centered earth relationship. They are led by Indigenous women and center a kinship worldview within their work. Restoring food sovereignty is also a pathway to building relationships between communities. Coming together around seeds and gardens creates friendship, understanding, and collective resistance to the industrialized farming that threatens the health and well-being of the earth. From a shared commitment to justice and equity, we can build new food systems that honor and respect Indigenous homelands, that acknowledge the gift of food from our more than human relatives, and invite Indigenous people to lead with their ancestral knowledge. As we grapple with changing our systems, there are two questions we need to continually ask ourselves. Who benefits from a program or new initiative, and who is not at the table? Applying the principles of justice and equity are equally important for all of our relatives, including the soil, our water, and the plants and animals who give their lives so that we may live. For example, in Minnesota, the land is planted with 8 million acres of genetically modified corn, much of which is used to feed livestock and create processed foods. GMO corn requires intensive use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, which ultimately end up in our water and destroy the long-term health of our soil. So let's ask ourselves, what can we do to help protect this relative? We can take small steps, such as buying only organic seeds, saving and sharing seeds when possible, and supporting small farmers by purchasing their organically grown foods. We can start a seed library. We can avoid purchasing seeds from big box stores that may have been treated with neonicotinoids, an insecticide that harms pollinators. And every day we can offer prayers of gratitude to our more than human relatives. We also do this work by sharing stories that nourish us, stories that educate, empower, and uplift our communities. When Arapaho elder Ernie Whiteman told me, if you can control the food, you can control the people, I realized that I could tell the history of Dakota people through the story of what happened to our food. And that's when I began writing my novel, The Seed Keeper. In many ways, writing this book was my way to reclaim the story of our ancient relationship with seeds, to give back to the people who have shared so much with me, and to help carry this work forward to future generations. As a writer, I feel a responsibility to uplift stories that have been silenced, that show our true history, as well as the courage, strength, and brilliance of our communities. One of the stories that were silenced is at the heart of The Seed Keeper. In Minnesota, for many years, schools did not teach the true history of the 1862 U.S.-Dakota War or the forcible removal of 1,700 Dakota women, children, and elders from Minnesota to the Crow Creek Reservation in South Dakota. Many of us learned about the removal when we participated in the Dakota Commemorative March in 2002. The story I was told was that because Dakota women had no idea where they were being sent or how they would feed their families, they sowed their seeds into the hems of their skirts and hid them in their pockets. Even when families were starving, these women protected their seeds for the coming season and for future generations. Thanks to their courage and sacrifice, we still have Dakota corn to grow today. These women offered a profound lesson about our responsibility for protecting our seeds. The challenges today are very different, but our responsibility remains the same. So the Seed Keeper is told through the voices of 4 Dakota women across several generations, from 1862 to 2002. And the seeds open the book with a poem that reminds us of our original agreement to take care of them in exchange for the gift of food. Because the seeds also close the book with the prayer, this is really their story that I'm telling, as they observe how humans are upholding their part of the agreement. So the main character is Rosalie Ironwing, and her family has come to the furthest edge of assimilation without being completely absorbed into mainstream society. And Rosalie doesn't speak her language, and she has little connection to her community. And I wanted to show how even when you've come to that point in assimilation programs, that there is still a way back by returning to these traditional ways. And so the story begins as Rosalie is about to leave the farm where she's lived for 22 years to return to her childhood home on a Dakota reservation. After her father died when she was 12, she grew up in foster care, believing she had no family. Rosalie had no connection at all to seeds. When she marries a white farmer and learns to garden, she begins the journey that will ultimately reconnect her to her family, their legacy of seeds, and her community. Throughout the book, the story moves around in time, alternating between the main character, Rosalie, and the voices of her best friend, Gabby Makepeace, who overcomes a difficult childhood to become a lawyer working to protect the river, reminding us that water is sacred. Miniwachoni, water is life. We also meet her great aunt, Darlene Kilsdare, who spends much of her life searching for Rosalie. She also represents the family's last seed keeper, who will do whatever she can to protect their seeds. And we meet Marie Blackbird, Rosalie's great-great-grandmother, who was 14 during the 1862 Dakota War. And she carries some of the hard history in this story, from the 1862 Dakota War to the removal afterwards, and then the beginning of the boarding school system and the impact on their family. And as we're following the lives of these women, we're also following the story of the seeds until one day they disappear. So near the end of the book, Rosalie's son, Thomas, is facing a crossroads where he has to decide how to care for the rare seeds that Darlene has given him. And just like Thomas, we're all facing a similar question. Every day, we choose whether to uphold a relationship with plants and animals that is centered in kinship and loving care, or one that upholds a food system that regards these relatives as commodities. As I was writing this book, it was very important to me that this story feel hopeful. With all of the challenges our communities are facing, we need to remember that returning to indigenous seeds and foods is one of the ways that we can recover the health of our communities and the land. At Dream of Wild Health, we tested the nutritional value of our seeds compared to market varieties. Our corn was much higher in protein, while our beans and squash were extremely high in antioxidants. Today, many seeds have been manipulated for reasons that have little to do with providing nutrition. And when I hold these old seeds in my hand, I'm reminded of all the generations before me who cared for them so that we might survive. As a Dakota grandmother, I'm responsible for teaching my children and grandchildren to be good relatives and to live each day believing that our actions will make a difference. Even if the world comes to an end tomorrow, we must still plant our seeds today. The question that I ask throughout the book is about the ways in which our relationship with seeds has changed over many generations, and what that change means for us as human beings and for the seeds themselves. Ultimately, The Seed Keeper is a story about protecting what we love, remembering our history, and celebrating the gifts we've received from our ancestors and the earth. My hope is that this book will help us remember that even small efforts, like reclaiming our relationship with seeds and planting a garden, can help create the world we envision for our families and our communities. And when we do this work, then we're reclaiming a healthy, sustainable relationship with the land that starts in our own backyards. We're remembering our food not as a commodity, but as medicine. And we are protecting what we love. And I'm going to close today with a paragraph from the book that is spoken by Rosalie when she's first learning to garden. And it pretty much sums up how I think about seeds. Everywhere I looked, I saw how seeds were holding the world together. They planted forests, covered meadows with wildflowers, sprouted in the cracks of sidewalks, or lay dormant until the long-awaited moment came, signaled by fire or rain or warmth. They filled the produce aisle in grocery stores. Seeds breathed and spoke in a language all their own. Each one was a miniature time capsule, capturing years of stories in its tender flesh. How ignorant I felt compared to the brilliance contained in a single seed. I had begun to see that when we save these seeds, when we select which ones will be planted again, our lives become braided into the life stories of these plants. Idamaya.
Wow, that was so fantastic. Wow. Like I am just mind blown with some of the things that you said during that presentation. It was really just so thought provoking at times when you were kind of going through thinking about questions around grief, especially. That was really, really touching to me. I wanted to cry, but also, but also like, how productive is that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You really did give me so
Yeah.
much hope in so many ways. And
Good.
so if you have any questions for Diane, please use the Q&A function down there on the lower bar. I'll be more than happy to read your questions in the final kind of 10 minutes or so. But seeing none, Diane, I have a question for you. I always like asking writers kind of who or what, I guess, are your biggest influences when it comes to your writing craft?
It varies a bit with each book. I tend to pick out a book that I work with as a mentor. So I will study the work of that writer, like really get into the nitty gritty of how did they put it together? What are the rhythm of their sentences and their paragraph? And so the book, my mentor book for this novel was Solar Storms by Linda Hogan. And she is one of my favorite writers. And so her form and her beautiful language were really inspiring to me. And then another book that was really important was Braiding Sweetgrass, of course. And then a book that isn't nearly so well known, but I just love is Native Science by Greg Coyetti. And that taught me so much about understanding a very different worldview and how the way we understand the world is rooted in our cosmology as individuals. So to really be aware of where our beliefs come from. It's one of the ways that we can examine them and potentially make change.
Wonderful. We have a question in the Q&A. Is there a possibility this presentation can be made available? Yes, it will be posted on the ACF YouTube channel. Just give it a couple days. There's a process to get that up online and all good with captioning and everything. So yes, short answer, yes, it will be available. Just keep an eye on all of that. So please, we welcome any and all questions. Did you have any? Commissioner Kunesh, I'm wondering if you have any questions for Diane?
Indeed, I do. And as a neighbor in Minnesota, I think the history that you've shared with us brings up so much of the trauma that we've experienced as a people, as families, as individuals. And I think one of your themes is that seeds can be healing. And maybe you can touch on that, the healing nature of seeds from sort of big trauma. That might be a stretch, but I think it fits.
No, it fits. Yeah, because I firmly believe that seed work, gardening are traditional foods. And by that, when I say traditional foods and I say indigenous seeds, what I mean are heirloom seeds that have been cared for by Native families for many generations. And when we return to this very old relationship with them, which simply means we're gardening, we're growing foods, we're sharing foods, we're harvesting, we're offering prayers, we're back in relationship, our hands in the soil. We're, you know, that relationship that comes every day when you're tending your plants, then to me, that is a birthright for human beings that we have become disconnected from through a food system that tends to provide foods for us that are grown in these industrialized conditions. So when we return to working with the earth herself, and we begin eating these foods again, we begin cooking with them. One of the ways that we're healing that trauma is simply through being in physical contact with the earth. But another way is when you eat those foods, what we always said was you are re-indigenizing yourself from the inside out. And so over the years at Dream of Wild Health, watching youth in the youth programs who would come up from the cities and you know, had varying degrees of relationship with their home communities, with their reservations and their own cultural identities, and watching how this process of returning into relationship with the land and then being with elders and really understanding their cultural identity, it was all part of watching those youth transform into community leaders. So I feel like when we start to take care of our bodies, you know, we're also taking care of our spirits and our mental health, and that returning to these foods is a big part of that. And it's joyful work. And you know, Patrice, when we're dealing with trauma, there is so much sorrow at times in that work. And it's really important to remember that our cultures are, they're affirming, they're uplifting, they are strengthening, they're positive, they are, and so returning to that work, and food work in particular, is joyful, because who doesn't love a good meal? Sharing a good meal. So that to me is one of the really, really strong healing steps in this process.
Lots of questions coming in now. Hopefully we can get to all of them, but we are running a little short on time. So our first question comes from Colby Dawn. Would you ever be interested in having a book club at a library, perhaps?
You know, I actually visit a lot of book clubs. So that's something that we can certainly email about. So what I've done, my practice when I make Zoom visits to book clubs, I ask for a donation to Dream of Wild Health. So just so you know that up front, that's my big fee.
Yeah, that seems to kind of touch into this other question here. Do you know of any national or statewide efforts to share or purchase heirloom seeds?
So in the back of the novel, I included a big afterword, and I reference Seed Savers in Iowa, and they are a very good-sized seed keeping organization that I actually worked with while I was at Dream of Wild Health, and they have a very extensive seed inventory that has been grown by a lot of people contributing their seeds. So they're one of the places that I will often send people to.
Awesome. There's a related question also. I mean, you might have already answered it, but if you know any other similar projects following the work that was done in Minnesota of using indigenous seeds or gardening practices for maintaining indigenous plants, I guess, are there any things happening across the country that you were aware of that are doing kind of similar work to that?
So I mentioned Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance, but Patrice, I wonder if you might mention the speaker that is coming. I think your next speaker.
Right. I was thinking about that, Diane, and it's a really great time to give a plug to Rowan White, who just recently won the James Beard Award for her seed keeping work. And she's just really phenomenal. She's a Mohawk woman living in the Sierra, and she's a passionate activist and advocate for indigenous seeds and food sovereignty, much like Diane. So she is, her program or project is Sierra Seeds, and she's coming to us. Is it next week, Capenna?
November 30th.
November. Oh, she's our last.
She's our last one. Yes.
Last guest. But she's on Facebook, Instagram, social media. I really encourage folks to check her out because she's just truly amazing. And she also has a podcast called Finding Our Way. And it seems that these are so many different wonderful intersections. It's about seeds, grief, and memory. And I think there are, these are just the most beautiful people that I know who are working with their hands, with Mother Earth, protecting our heritage, protecting our health, and encouraging us to be the best people we possibly can. So Rowan White coming on November 30th. She has been honored for her contributions to the sustainable food systems through her work at Sierra Seeds, and it's part of this Indigenous Seed Keepers Network that, Diane, I think you've just really propelled far and further than we could possibly have imagined with your book, The Seed Keeper.
Thank you.
So it looks like we're out of time for the most part, but Commissioner, if you want to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Melissa Lewis, for next week, and kind of close us off with some good words.
Yes, Wopilatanka, everyone. Thank you for joining us throughout this month, I hope, as we honor the seeds of our past and nurture the seeds of our present, and then also as we think about cultivating the seeds of our future. I really do think that together, collectively, we can strengthen the bonds of our Native and Indigenous relatives, the relationships that Diane has shared with us. And I just love this statement from Diane, the brilliance of a single seed. And that's what I'm going to take away, is that all of this, there's brilliance in a single seed or a single action. So next week, we can welcome Dr. Melissa Lewis. She's the Executive Director of Cherokee Little Seeds. It's a language immersion program on a Cherokee reservation in Oklahoma, but she also is looking at these little ones as seeds, right? And cultivating the seeds of our future through language, through ceremony, through song and stories. So come back next week. We're going to have another great program. Diane, from the bottom or top of my heart, from the deepest part of my heart, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. It's such an honor to be here, and thank everyone for coming.
Yes,
All right.
thank you. Thank you, everyone. See you.